Let's add some code so that instead of selecting the first item, we use the current selection of our tree view. So let's remove to first. Go to our node editor and make a method called setSelection. This method should take two parameters, current selection and old selection. The input types are QModel indices. And remember, they store valuable information about the item. Inside the method, we need to get the parent from the current QModel index or the current selection. So current parent. Once we have the parent, we need to set it as a root index in our data mapper. Self data mapper set root index parent. And finally, we need to set the current model index to the current selection. So self data mapper set current model index to current selection. Okay, all that's left is using the signal called current changed and connecting it with our setSelection method. The owner of this signal is the selection model of our tree view. We haven't talked about selection models yet, but you should know that they exist and can be used to sync the selections of two views. Anyhow, go up to our window class, and at the bottom write this PyQt4 QObject connect. Remember, this is how you connect the signal with a widget. Whose signal do we want to connect? We want to connect the UI tree selection models signal. Which signal do we want to connect? We want to connect the signal called current changed, which has two parameters. QModel index is the first type, and the second type is also QModel index. And then finally, who's gonna receive the parameters? It's gonna be our node editor, and which function? It's gonna be setSelection. Okay, it's time to test this now. Run the application, select something. We see that the property grid actually updates with our current selection, and it works on the children as well. That's why we had to set the root of the QData widget mapper. Let's try renaming H to something. Boom, it works. We basically got ourselves a property grid. Works perfectly. We can also edit the names inside the tree view, and it would update on the properties grid, as you can see. Perfect. And remember that type info is readable only. You can't edit anything in it. Time to implement back our proxy model logic. We have to do some changes. First of all, let's uncomment all the lines. And remove the setModel call, where we set the model directly to the view. This is where we do that. And finally, use our proxy model instead of our data model for the node editor proxy model. Our node editor also requires some modifications. It receives our proxy model now. Let's quickly rename the parameters to make it more readable. Alt-Shift-R opens up the rename function of the editor. So when we type the new value, it will automatically search and replace everything. This is an Eclipse function, by the way. Anyhow, the data mapper doesn't want a proxy model, since that's not where the implementation of how to receive data is. It wants our original data model. Fortunately, this is easy. The proxy model has a getter called source model. So on the data mapper set model, we will just do point or dot source model, since the data lies in the source model. Finally, in the setSelection method, the current selection, which is a QModel index class, is received from a QProxy class, which might have sorted everything. The values it holds might not match our original data model. So we need to map it back to the source. Again, easy task. There's a function called map to source, which takes a QModel index and returns a mapped QModel index. Let's do that. So current equals self proxy model map to source with the current. So we take the current, which is a Q proxy model index, we map it to source and retrieve a new QModel index. Done. Our sorting and filtering should be back online. Let's test it. Alright, we get an error. Has no attribute proxy model. Oh yeah, here's the problem. Proxy model. Now you can see that our selections work and we can still sort without the property grid going crazy. And we can also filter. As you can see, the property grid still goes okay. So now we have a property grid working nicely with our filtering and sorting features. And we can still rename and pick this and rename it there and see the update on the property grid. We need to refactor our code a little. Boring stuff, but necessary. First, fire up the designer. Our goal is to separate the property grid from the window. So create a new widget and then add a Q group box inside it. Lay it out in anything you want. Rename it to properties and the object name to UI properties. Add two horizontal layouts like before. Align them in a vertical layout. Rename the layouts to layout node and layout specs. Finally, open the tutorial06 file and delete the group box. Save it now. And also save the newly created property editor. Now load the UI base and form class. I called mine tutorial06 underscore properties UI. Like so. Prop base and prop form. Tutorial06 properties UI. Create a class for this just as before. I'm gonna copy paste those bits you have done several times to make this faster. There we have the class. Now the constructor should create all our editors, so move them from our window class to this properties editor class. So we take all of those and move them into this class. And instead of setting the model here, we will actually make a method called setModel with the proxy model. And then inside this function we'll set the same model for all our editors. So light editor, camera editor, and transform editor. And let's not forget to remove the self underscore part. We might also want to store the proxy model in a protected member. Proxy model, none. Let's also, whoops, let's have that one up here instead and set it to proxy model. Okay, add a method called setSelection to our properties editor class. It should receive two parameters as before, current and old. So let's just copy this one. But we will only delegate the current selection to our node class. So our node editor no longer needs the old selection parameter because it will receive the selection from a properties editor and not from a PyQt4 signal, which actually sends two QModel indices. So we can remove that. Old, gone. The rest will be the same. Instantiate the properties editor inside our main window class. I had already done it, but I'm gonna show you how to do it. So, prop editor, a new properties editor with ourself as a parent. Now go back to the designer, check what's the name of the layout in our UI Central widget. It's called vertical layout right now. I'm gonna change that to layout main, and then in the code write self layout main add widget, and we're gonna add the prop editor, and finally we need to set the model of our prop editor. Set model with our proxy model. Okay, scroll down to the set model call of our property editor. We call light editor twice. One should be camera editor. Besides, those are not implemented yet, so we can comment them out for now. Running this should give us exactly what we had before. Has no attribute layout main. I guess I forgot to save. Yep. And there we go. Everything as expected. We have just made the code much cleaner and refactored out what's actually logical to refactor, such as the properties editor. It was inside our window class before, and now it's outside of it, so it is actually reusable if you would want it to.